Hi, everyone. I'm Meg Oliver.
And I'm Elaine Quijano. The combat mission against ISIS is growing today. U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter says special forces are being sent to fight the terror group.
Carter explained what troops would be doing while testifying on the Hill to the House Armed Services Committee.
We're defending the homeland, acting to defeat ISIL in its core in Syria and Iraq, and taking appropriate action wherever else in the world this evil organization metastasizes. We're at war. We're using the might of the finest fighting force the world has ever known. Tens of thousands of U.S. personnel are operating in the broader Middle East region, more on the way. We're sending, on President Obama's orders and the chairman's and my advice, Special Operations Forces personnel to Syria to support the fight against ISIL.
Senior National Security Correspondent David Martin joins us now from the Pentagon. David, how different is this than what the U.S. has already been doing in the fight against ISIS?
There's a major change here. The sending of Special Operations Forces to Syria had already been announced, but what Secretary Carter said today that was absolutely new is that the U.S. was going to be permanently basing Special Operation Forces inside Iraq to conduct raids against ISIS targets in both Iraq and Syria. Until now, whenever the U.S. conducted a raid in either Iraq or Syria, that force, usually the Delta Force, has been brought in from outside the country to conduct a specific raid. Once that raid is either carried out or called off, the force goes back outside the country and returns to another base. When you put them in the country and keep them there, you cut down the time it takes to mount a raid once you get good intelligence, because you no longer have to transport them from outside the country. What's happening here is an attempt to replicate the kinds of special operations that took down ISIS's predecessor in Iraq, which was the group known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And Special Operations Forces defeated Al-Qaeda in Iraq by conducting raids every single night. And every single night, they would capture members of Al-Qaeda, they would scoop up their cell phones and laptops, they would gather intelligence from people they captured from the cell phones and laptops, and often in the same night, mount more raids based on that new intelligence. In this case, when they're coming from outside the country and you only conduct one raid in every several months, which has been the case so far, you don't get a snowballing effect that you need of more raids producing more intelligence, which produce more raids, which produce more intelligence, on and on. So they're trying to develop a system now for taking out ISIS on the ground with U.S. Special Operations Forces. And you have to point out that by doing this, you're increasing the risk to the American troops who go in. In the last raid that was conducted, which was a rescue of hostages that were held by ISIS inside Iraq, one American soldier, a member of the Delta Force, was killed, and he was the first to be killed by enemy action since the war against ISIS began. And now, with these Special Operations Forces based in Iraq, that obviously is going to be something that could happen more frequently.
So, David, that was one of my questions about the increased exposure, meaning the increased risk and possibility of American casualties. You just answered that question, but also I'm wondering who will partner with these U.S. Special Operations Forces? How reliable are the other fighting forces on the ground in Iraq that presumably will be assisting?
Well, in Iraq, they'll be working either with Peshmerga Special Forces or what's known as the Iraqi Counterterrorism Force. And the Iraqi Counterterrorism Force is an elite force which has been trained by the U.S. So they will be operating with fairly dependable partners inside Iraq. If they go into Syria, they'll be operating on their own.
All right, David Martin for us. Thank you.
Sure thing.